Welcome and thank you for joining us on the 2019 webinar, Revisiting Creative Approaches to Capitalization and Capacity Building, where we revisit the Hats On, Hats Off Capitalization session from the 2018 Grantmakers in the Arts Conference. Grantmakers in the Arts is a national membership association of public and private arts and culture funders. Our mission is to provide leadership and service that advances the use of philanthropic and governmental resources to support the growth of arts and culture. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. In this webinar, Anna Campbell, Senior Program Officer at the Howard Gilman Foundation, and Roman Jackson, Program Officer at J.P. Morgan, will guide us through capitalization fundamentals and best practices from the field. They will facilitate an exploration of creative solutions for when restrictions make capitalization and capacity building much more difficult. In preparation for this, we shared 2 case studies, also linked in red to the left of your screen, and we hope you had time to review them. During the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to engage with the presenters and make proposals via an open response box that will appear on your screen when it comes time to submit your ideas. Both presenters have a strong background in arts funding. Anna Campbell joined the Howard Gilman Foundation in 2015. Previously, Campbell was the Arts Program Officer at the Educational Foundation of America, or EFA, where she developed and managed a portfolio of innovative creative placemaking projects in both urban and rural communities across the country. Prior to EFA, Campbell was the Assistant Director at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, where she oversaw programming grants for hundreds of cultural organizations across the city and was the agency's point person for launching the Culture Data Project in New York State. Roman Van Jackson has more than a decade of experience in philanthropy, grant-making, and nonprofit service. Jackson joined J.P. Morgan Chase & Company as a program officer with the Private Foundation Services Group in May of 2015. In this role, he engages with over 60 foundations and charitable trust clients of J.P. Morgan's private bank, working closely with advisors, trust officers, trustees, clients, and grant managers to assist with the day-to-day management of grant-making for foundations and trusts, including the Boots Ferris Foundation, the Valentine Perry Snyder Fund, and others. We are glad to have them present on this webinar. At the very end of the presentation, I will be joining to facilitate a Q&A between Anna and Roman. With that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Welcome, Anna and Roman. Why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Sherilyn, for the introduction. Before we get started, I would just like to give everyone kind of like a brief background on how this all started. It began as an interest group within the New York Grantmakers in the Arts cohort, a regional grant-making network based here in New York City. This cohort included myself, Sharon Haba from the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, Ed Harsh, formerly with New Music USA, Sam Ender, who's my colleague at J.P. Morgan, Gus Sarlenberg from the Theater Communication Group, and Anna, my co-host today. And I'll pass it over to Anna just to talk about how the experience went.
Great, thanks, Roman. As Roman said, this began as a regional grant-making kind of collective. We all gathered together because we were interested in this idea of capacity building and realized as we started talking with each other that all of our definitions of capacity building were different. We funded capacity building differently, and we had a lot of examples from our own work experience where capitalization and capacity building intersected quite often. So we talked as a group about what our definitions of capitalization and capacity building really were. We kind of came down to the simple definitions of fiscal health versus operational health. And we talked more about how these two pieces bump into each other and affect each other from our point of view as funders. So through a lot of real-life examples, we also saw how our combined strengths could really enhance each other's work. So J.P. Morgan funds capacity building differently than the Howard Gilman Foundation. The Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone funds it slightly differently, but altogether we could bring different pieces to the puzzle that would potentially build a stronger organization. So we focus on this idea of collaboration. I've been watching a lot of superhero movies with my kids lately, so it is reminiscent of Justice League, of funders. As a team, maybe we could save the world. Or at least help an organization survive and thrive. And as arts funders, we had a real drive to be creative in this work, not just in our grant-making techniques, but also in the format that we presented this information. So you'll see how that played out in just a moment. We want to start, though, with this idea of the case studies that hopefully you received and had a moment to read. If you didn't, that's okay. We'll go through some of the highlights in a moment. But I want to note that these case studies are compilations of extreme examples of capacity gone wrong. If they resemble any organizations you know, that's not intentional, but it also may not be surprising. These case studies were built from lists and lists of instances where we saw applicants and grantees of our own bumping into issues of capacity building and capitalization. And you'll note that one organization is a mid-sized and culturally specific organization, although it is a fictional cultural identity. And the other, is a historic, large, established institution. And we want to be clear up front that we recognize capacity and capitalization issues and the opportunities associated with that need to take into account institutionalized racism and all the historical inequities across the board that affect these organizations. But thinking about that, we were deliberately vague in the case studies regarding race or cultural identity. And this is so we can focus the conversation on conceptual approaches to the work, given all the issues raised in the studies themselves. Overall, an important part of this conversation is really about considering points where philanthropy and other structural inequities have created the issues at hand and could be used to support the organizations moving forward. So we're hoping these imaginary scenarios will really help encourage our creativity in addressing the very real challenges that these organizations face. So here's the setup. Everybody has a role to play in this webinar today. As you know, there are two organizations that are at hand. They are both based in a fictional 6th district in Alphabet City, which is a metropolis somewhere in the United States. The first organization is called the Orbre Arts Collective. It's a mid-sized, multidisciplinary arts organization led by the founder and artist, Gerble Mertzi. The second organization is the Bunyan Institute of the Goliath. This acronym is BIG, an 81-year-old institution in a landmarked building in the same city. You, all of our participants today, are a group of funders in Alphabet City that have come together to work with the ABC Community Trust to create a funder collaborative. The collaborative has already decided to fund both of these organizations. So the task at hand isn't whether or not to fund them. The task at hand is to come up with recommendations on the type of support that we can include. So what we'll do next is review the case studies, and we'll see brief video presentations from the development leads at each institution where they will give us more context about their opportunities and needs. Then we're going to hear from Rex Addington, who's the program officer at the ABC Community Trust, who will give us some background on what the trust is hoping to gain from this funder collaboration. And then we ask all of you to become an actor for a little bit. First, we're going to talk about hats off, where we ask you to forget about what your current job's funding restrictions or priorities are and focus only on your overall professional expertise to craft the ideal funding scenario for these groups. So basically, you have no rules. You can just come up with, in your best professional mindset, what the ideal solution would be for these two organizations. Then we're going to put your hats back on, and this is when you'll be figuring out possible approaches with the resources you actually have in your current roles to see that ideal scenario come to life. And we'll question whether or not it's even possible to achieve that ideal scenario and what other funders you need at your table to make that sort of scenario come true. So to do all of this throughout the presentation, we'll be introducing feedback from our sessions in New York and Oakland, and then we'll invite everyone on the webinar to participate at the end to make proposals to the ABC Community Trust.
All right, and so I'm going to go over some of the strengths and challenges from some of the case studies that you've received. And so this is the Aubrey Arts Collective, and just some of the strengths that were identified and both of the sessions that we had previously were that there's a Murty, the visionary founder, who's well beloved both by the artistic and local librarian communities. She plays a critical role in the community, including space and educational programming. The organization has existed for over 30 years despite challenging economic times and a lean staff. And they're poised to be a premier librarian organization nationally. And these might be some strengths that you may be able to kind of like identify and maybe in leaders and organizations that are in your community. And here are some of the challenges as well that were identified, whether the board and staff are too small. Mercy's role as the ED and the AD and the chair of the board presents a problem, and it's a conflict. It also runs on Mercy's knowledge and leadership, so there's no succession plan, and also, gentrification threatens the organization. There's a potential for a big decrease soon. Has a negative net assets and significant debt. And the board lacks capacity to contribute financially or bring in new funding. And so these are a lot of the trends that we saw come up often as we were viewing this case study in our media sessions. And definitely case studies that might be representative of a local community organization that has a pretty small budget. Going to case 2, which is the Bunyan Institute of Goliath, are known as BIG. Also, the strength has a roster of committee board members with significant financial capacity, iconic arts organization, and one of the top tourist destinations in the region. Has a robust infrastructure and is able to provide programming in a variety of languages. Some of the challenges, the board and the staff are too big. The board has oversized control over operations and programming, while senior management positions operate independently. There are conflicts between the executive director and artistic director, causing a divide amongst the board and the staff. No capital or working reserve for significant maintenance costs for landmark buildings. No immediate plans for building a reserve. And last, struggling to reach diverse and local communities. Audience numbers and ticket sales are steadily declining. We both have to emphasize, as Anna brought up in her beginning, that these 2 case samples are not representative of one particular organization, but are just represents really strengths and challenges that we've seen in our work in the field, and that our peer funders have identified as well, not necessarily just here in the New York community, but also nationally. And so even though we have these case studies in front of us, it would be great to kind of hear from possibly the members themselves. And so Anna, if you can come back on and introduce the videos.
Sure. So now we have videos from our 3 representatives. The first is the development lead at the Aubrey Arts Collective. The second will be the lead at BIG. And the third will be Rex from the ABC Community Trust. And here we go.
Hi, I'm Samantha Ender, and I'm the Development Manager for the Aubrey Arts Collective, known as OAC, here in Alphabet City. I am the development manager. I've been here for the last 4 months and really still getting up to speed on this incredible organization that I'm sure many of you are already very familiar with, and especially with our visionary founder and leader, Gilman. Gilman is our executive director as well as our artistic director and the chair of our board, and has been a passionate member of the Arbrarian community here in Alphabet City for her entire 72 years. The OAC really plays an important role, not only within the Arbrarian community, but also within the larger cultural sector of Alphabet City. They are a representative organization, really trying to bring all of the Arbrarian arts and culture back out into the world, as well as reflecting itself within the community. Many of you are maybe not as familiar with Arbrarian art or culture, although we certainly encourage you to come to the 6th District, take a look around, enjoy some Arbrarian performances, eat some delicious Arbrarian food, and get a little bit more familiar with one of the really special communities here in our city. But we have recently seen a little bit more of an uptake in the broader arts and culture sector of Arbrarian art as a whole. Including a really great feature on Gilman in the GIA Reader, which I hope you all read. The organization itself is small but mighty. We have 4 really passionate junior staff members who all hail from the community, as well as a small cadre of volunteers that help to create a multidisciplinary art space in the 6th District that helps to provide all of the Arbrarian community members with opportunities and outlets for their art, as well as opportunities for a community meeting space. We have a relatively small space. It's in one of those warehouses that's been semi-remodeled over the years. We have a 90-seat theater, we have a studio space, and some spare rooms that we use as meeting spaces for the community, usually free of charge. Our lease is up in 2 years, which we're a little bit concerned about. I'm sure you all have seen some of the articles in the newspaper lately about the impact of potential gentrification. The tech companies coming in have all really found a home in the 6th District, which we're delighted by, but have some concerns about, especially given the fact that our lease is up. And wondering a little bit about how the Arbrarian community will continue to sustain itself and really thrive in the 6th District. We have a passionate board at the OAC. All of them have been with us since the beginning. Most of them are childhood friends of Gilman's from the community. And they really, really love the work that we do, are incredible defenders of our art and passionate about bringing it to the people. Maybe a little bit less fundraising expertise than we'd like them to have, and that's something that we're thinking a lot about as an organization. But we certainly are grateful for their service, and Gilman has really had a wonderful working partnership with them. We recognize that some of the challenges that we face are not uncommon for an organization like ours. Looking to the future, recognizing that we do have a visionary founder and leader who will not be with us forever, and a board that likewise has been in service for many, many years. So we're thinking a lot about what the next steps are for the OAC, as well as what the next steps are for the Arbrarian community as a whole. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit more about the OAC. We hope that you all make your way out to the 6th District, come and see a performance in our space, and enjoy more of what the community has to offer.
Hello everyone, I'm Karuna West, the Chief Development Officer of the Bunyan Institute at Goliath, or BIG as we're affectionately known. And on behalf of the board and staff of BIG, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. Now, I know many of you are no strangers to BIG. Maybe you were brought here by your parents who were themselves brought here by their parents. You've been to our exhibits. You've seen our world-class performances. You've taken advantage of our robust education program. But whatever you think you know about BIG, for right now, I want you to set it aside because BIG is headed in some bold new directions. Now, perhaps no story captures where BIG is in this particular moment than in the origin story of the #BigTime selfies. I'm sure that you've seen them on social media, but it all came when one of our new marketing associates got the great idea to take a selfie of herself in front of our beloved iconic facade and then post it with the #BigTime. Well, what do you know? But people who had never been into BIG, who had felt it was just not for them, were suddenly snapping selfies of themselves with the #BigTime. But while that's where we're headed, that bold new relationship that harnesses digital media and live performance to reach a whole new demographic, we are also deeply rooted in our traditions. Under the stewardship of our executive director, who I know so many of you know, we were thrilled to receive a very generous gift from our board chair that will ensure that the Sibelius Symphony Series will continue. Now, if you are not a Sibelius lover yet, we are absolutely going to change that, because we really do believe that there is a Sibelius symphony for every single person in Alphabet City, and they just don't know it yet. And we're so thrilled that this financial gift will help us bring the groundbreaking work of Sibelius to a brand new generation. But while we are tending to those roots under our executive director's leadership, we are also being tugged in exciting new directions by our new artistic director, who has a, I would say, radical vision of how our work can engage with community. We're at a really interesting inflection point for Big, where so many folks who've been working here for so long are simultaneously energized and curious about the new direction of the artistic director, and also feeling really excited to stay connected to the ways that we've been doing it for all along. So with your support, what you're going to be able to help Big do is manage this beautiful transition. Your support is going to help Big continue to honor the traditions of the past, but take advantage of the new ways of engaging with community. And yes, with your help, we will eventually fix our beautiful, iconic facade, but not quite yet. There's still too many people taking those selfies with the hashtag big time. At this moment, when we are reinvigorating our relationship with our community, it is just not the time for us to shut down that beloved icon and hide our face from the community we love. So that's where we are. We're so grateful for this time, and we're so grateful for your support. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rex Additon, Director of Thriving Creative Communities at the ABC Community Foundation. At TCF, we strive to build strong communities by investing in the capitalization of leading arts institutions. This is why we are approaching our colleagues in the arts community to help us build the capacity of two important organizations, the Aubrey Art Collective and the Bunyan Institute at Goliath. My cousins are librarian, and I've had wonderful exposure to their culture through family gatherings and also as a child hanging out in the 6th Borough. Also, my kids love going to Big and taking photos on Instagram with hashtag big time. So both organizations are pretty important. We are interested in hearing from our peers about the types of investments that we can make collaboratively to help both organizations. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please participate in the chat function here on the webinar.
Great. So this is Anna back with you. I hope you enjoyed those videos. We had fun making them. And as I mentioned in the earlier slide, this is where we wanted you to think about taking your job hats off and think about what ideal scenarios would help you work towards capitalization and capacity building for these two organizations. And I want to just make a quick note here that in the two previous workshops that we did, these were all face-to-face meetings where people gathered around tables and worked in teams. So this was the point in the workshop where we had conversations. And I think that's an important part in the Funder Collaborative model. But because we're on a webinar, we're going to be saving that chat for the end. Which is in just a moment, where we'll ask you to participate. So here we're just recapping some of the ideas that came up in our previous workshops regarding what the ideal scenarios would be when hats are off and you could just, as a funder, do whatever you think would be the best possible next step for these two groups. So for the OAC, one of the big pieces was getting them out of debt and helping them provide some kind of financial management expertise to help manage those finances that could hinder future funding. There was also concern about grooming leaders for Mertzi's impending departure. So there could be a life after the founder for this important institution. And then helping kind of ramp up the organization's board docket. So there was a deeper board list and roster that could potentially be a little bit more effective in the fundraising and governance aspects of that organization. For BIG, a lot of people were focused on fixing the crumbling facade as that posed some serious liability issues for visitors and passersby. And then a big push towards strategic planning to address some of these issues that were more internal regarding staff, board, and the financial planning challenges. And there was also an effort to connect BIG with OAC, since they're both in the same city and the same district, to partner on some of the programming and marketing initiatives, as there seemed to be an opportunity there for both to help each other out. And then the next idea is to put your hats back on. So once you've come up with your ideal and you put your job hat back on, are you able to achieve your ideal within your current funding practice? And if not, who else do you need at the table to help you get to where you want to go? When people put their hats back on, some of the pieces that came out about what was actually possible around these conversations was actually, yes, many funders could supply support to find a financial management class or consultant for OAC. Some funders are able to fund debt elimination. One funder at the Oakland conference actually suggested just buying the building that Obrey is in and providing consistent low rent, which is a model some organizations or funders are able to actually do. Funding the succession planning, doing some sort of highlighting of the OAC presence, and funding board consultants are all other things that funders were able to provide. For BIG, again, strategic planning, connecting with OAC, funding those important building repairs and capital reserves, and subsidies for new audiences were all options that funders were able to provide. So now we're going to move, whoops, we don't want to conclude yet. We're going to move into the participatory part of this webinar. So Roman, do you want to introduce the next piece?
Yeah. It's odd because that Rex, he looks very familiar, but I can't put my nose on it. So now is the time when we are opening up the webinar for participation. The message box is available for you to type in your proposals to the trust. We know we are asking you to create a funders collaborative while you're isolated from one another, but you can propose scenarios that you envision would work with the right partners. And so we'll give everyone a few minutes to type in a full proposal, or even if you have a specific comment that you would like to type in, please feel free to participate. And also, we will keep all comments anonymous, and so please don't be shy.
And while you're coming up with comments or scenarios, I can also add that in the workshop setting, a lot of these conversations go back to perception of what capacity and capitalization really are, and I think I talked about that in the beginning. And regardless of your definition and regardless of the actual tools you have to support organizations in these efforts, I think the exercise that we're trying to emphasize here is taking that hat off. It's more about your professional expertise and your experience in the field to imagine scenarios that could actually be effective but aren't hindered by restrictions or specific priorities that you might have where you work. So we can really rely upon the funding community rather than just on one particular funder. So you can make up participants if you need to.
And one of our commenters actually brought up, just following up on Anna, what you talked about and what came up in Oakland, helping to facilitate connections to local government. If there are potentials to purchase property or even help with rent, which I mean, really a big part of this is helping organizations are helping us as funders to really come together to talk about these things collaboratively, and they happen on a very informally. To be honest, this session got started through informal conversations between Anna and I and a few other colleagues, and so it's really about helping to create more formal pathways to these conversations, and I know there are definitely a lot of formal funders collaboratives that have come out to really help bring us all on board, and some of those funders collaboratives are really targeted towards helping to facilitate those conversations with our local government and even sometimes our state government. So, and another comment, funding for implementation of a founder's transition plan for Orbre. Really helping these organizations to build planning, not only help them build strategic plans, but providing them with the funding for the planning and providing them with the funding for the implementation of those plans is pretty important as well. And I know there are definitely some, in my previous line of work, the organization that I work with is really responsible for helping organizations to develop these plans, but we also really try to facilitate conversations with other funders in the area to make sure that those plans were funded appropriately so they could be implemented as well.
Yeah, and I see this comment regarding a matching grant designed for Big's board to step up and create a capital campaign for the building, which, it seems kind of odd that they haven't done that already, since it's such a well-endowed and heavy on the board side kind of organization, but certainly a matching grant is a great kind of leverage that could actually bring in other funders to help with that match. So that kind of collaboration is something that I know we have participated in and could certainly kind of get things moving.
And see another comment. Convening opportunities for Orbre and Big staff board to meet and see how they can help each other. Each has aspects that can help the other. I mean, this is a great point, and I think it's important to not necessarily pit these organizations against each other, because I know in our world, nonprofits sometimes operate in a world of scarcity, believing that there's not an unlimited sources of funding, and that there needs to be competition, that they need to compete for those fundings. However, when organizations start thinking collaboratively, can start working together towards some of the challenges that they may be facing in their organization, it might actually help both to sustain long term than actually fighting each other for resources.
Yeah, I like the comment that both of these orgs need a lot of work, which we said in the beginning. These are extreme examples, but unfortunately we might see real-life organizations that are not that different. But I think this comment regarding multi-year investments and all these different elements really speak to the kind of opportunities that these collaborations can bring to the table with funders being able to target different pieces of this puzzle, which was the idea behind this. And I see here that we have a couple of calls for a strategic plan, which obviously I think would be a huge help, particularly for Orbre. Now I like this idea of funding OIC to move into the big building. Wow, that's a great idea. We'll see. We'll see what they can do. Collaboration takes time. Let's let them be roommates. That would be a really unusual but perhaps fantastic solution to these issues. I think too the idea behind all of this is really about brainstorming. So I love seeing all these comments come in, because when you brainstorm like this, a lot of people can pick up on different parts that they can actually do in real life and not just theoretically. So I'd be curious to see if these proposals are ones that people are suggesting in their current roles, or if these are ones that people are suggesting as an ideal scenario, because that's where the trick is making the ideal come true. So if future comments might be able to include a note whether or not this is ideal or real, that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Anna. I mean, it'll be great to see if if people have been successful at this type of collaboration, either in a formal structure or an informal structure. So it'll be interesting to see kind of like the structure in which these collaborations have happened as well in your comments.
Well, here's a real model. The Tourist Development Tax Capital Challenge Grant Program. It's a mouthful. Sourced from a convention tax with a key towards tourist development as the outcome. So that sounds like perhaps a local municipality partnership, or some sort of partnership from a government level taxing authority, which definitely seems like it would provide the kinds of dollars that these institutions could use.
Oh, interesting. For collaboration between OAC and BIG, a town hall and how the community sees both organizations, and how has both organizations have served them, and is there more than that needs to be done?
Yeah.
I mean, that is an interesting comment. Really just being able to get, I mean, which I think everyone is kind of sometimes kind of consider like feedback, especially a public feedback, but at the same time, it really helps to get an understanding of like the public perception of the organization, and especially be able to understand how the people that you are intending to serve actually feel about your organization.
Yeah, and I see this comment about emerging leader development and a program to train culturally specific arts workers to take on roles in both organizations, which could certainly fill several different capacity needs for both groups. But I also appreciate the comment about it being a long-term strategy rather than a short-term fix, which I think is also something to consider when we're coming up with these kinds of solutions. What's going to help the here and now, and what's going to prep for the future? So thank you for that.
And I see another comment. I'm not sure if this is already brought up, but investing in an emerging leader development program to change culturally specific artists, workers to take on the roles both at Big and Orbre. This is a long-term strategy that could benefit other arts organizations as well. Yeah, I think I really like the idea of the train culturally specific arts workers because they're often the arts workers are often the people who aren't really who aren't at the table when like all these high level decisions are made, and whether it's their skills haven't been developed to take on leadership skills, or if there's kind of some block barrier within their own organizations that really prevents them from being at the table. And so I think that's a pretty good plan of really being able to ensure, like, bring up those workers to kind of like the operations of the organization, kind of envision them potentially taking on leadership roles and eventually having the executive director or like the head leadership within in a reasonable succession plan.
Yeah, and I see more comments here about planning, a staff retreat. For Big, given the internal tension, they certainly seem to need some kind of intervention. Both orgs are going through big organizational shifts. Participate in deep planning. I think there were other calls for strategic planning in here. And the town hall idea. I mean, all of this kind of research and deep investment, I think, is something that's come up in every workshop that we've done. Because I think from most of our points of view as funders, the inclination is investing in something that's been really explored, and with that level of deep planning is an easier road to take than just funding something before it's been tested or before the thought has been put into it to know that it's the right choice. And so I'm calling that out because it's a common thread that we've seen throughout the past year and a half, that planning goal is something that most everybody has called out as the first step.
Wow. We thank you all for these comments. Like, they're really great. And sorry we can't get to them all, but these are just really wonderful comments. And I think now we're going to move on to the Q&A portion.
Great. Thank you, Roman and Anna. That was an awesome presentation, and I think it was really interesting and exciting to hear all of the different suggestions, and I can tell that there are many different types of funders on the webinar, and for varying levels of experience, because the contributions were all very different. I thought that was great. So we'll now begin our Q&A. And please be specific about who the question is for. And just a reminder to insert your questions in the Q&A box to the bottom of your screen. And so we'll get started. And for our first question we've got here, and this can go to both of you, anyone. Is there any difference between the New York City workshop, so this webinar, and the National GIA Conference workshop in terms of how funders responded to the hats-on question? Were collaborators easier or faster with funders who already knew each other, or more creative with funders who didn't know each other?
Well,
Anna or Roman?
From my experience, from my experience, it's funny because we did this workshop locally first before we moved on to grant makers in the arts national conference, and we actually had serious concerns that that would be the issue, especially in the kind of the hats-on role, where national funders from different kinds of communities all across the country and even the world, it would be a much slower process. However, I mean, we found that that wasn't the case. We got a lot of great ideas in the national conferences section, and people were really eager to like work collaboratively, even on a national scale, even coming from different communities. And so, we were not only like we were not only surprised, but we were also thrilled just to see that even though like people were coming from different communities, that there's a real need out there for people to like want to work collaboratively, and people were excited about it. Anna, do you have any additional comments about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the New York City audience, because it works together so frequently, was a little bit faster in its conclusions, but the audience in Oakland, I would say, and no offense to my colleagues here in New York, was a little bit more creative in that there were such a variety of folks there with a variety of different kinds of funding programs. And so I feel like the opportunity there was a little bit more robust in that we were learning about each other, and we had a little bit more playing to do in the creativity side.
Awesome. Thank you both. And we've got another question. And the person says, and this is for both of you, Anna and Roman, it's clear that a collaborative approach is necessary to help these organizations. When you brought the funding community together, what limitations do these types of collaboration have? So anyone can answer that one.
Well, I think also, well, with any collaborative, the limitations are bounded by the structures of the organizations that you work with, and so I think at first there's just some apprehension, just because you're always trying to figure out, is the group's collective like aligned with my individual goals and what the goals of my organization, and so but I think the trick is just trying to figure out how the group itself can align on priorities that most of the collaborators can work towards. I mean, there definitely are going to be there's always going to be organizations that can't participate in certain parts of the collaborative just based off of their own limitations. However, I think that one, if the funder if the funder is really interested in the overall mission, they'll try to figure out a workaround, or really try to figure out like another way of being able to help, whether that's providing a grant directly to the specific organization that, although might not be a part of what the collaborative is doing, might be able to help that specific organization might be able to help in that particular organization position itself to where it can take advantage of like what's being offered by the collaborative, or really just for, I guess, emotional support as well. But yeah, I think and even though like someone might not be able to with their money towards a particular collaborative, they can definitely lend their voice, or find some way of supporting the collaborative as a whole. So I think people just really have to get on board with wanting to help a particular organization or wanting to fight for a particular cause. And then I feel once that happens, organizations and funders can kind of get creative on what their role is to help.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got another question, and this is more focused on the challenges facing BIG. So as cited in the Executive Director, Artistic Director Challenges Facing BIG, how extensively do you consider potential issues or conflict in leadership when deciding whether or not to provide funding?
I'll start with this one. I think in this particular case study, we took out the decision about whether or not we're providing funding on purpose because of this particular question. I think every grant-making entity will perhaps have a different point of view on how to answer this question. And then if you take your hats off, you might have your own personal / professional point of view on how to answer that question. But we deliberately took this question off the table because we felt like it would be hard to answer as a collaborative. I can say from my professional point of view, if it's an organization that has been a part of a grantee cohort or a part of the fabric of the ecosystem that the foundation is trying to support, then this is a really meaty kind of capacity opportunity to help resolve issues and conflict. I think funders aren't magicians, and we're not, we don't have the magic touch in all circumstances, and money doesn't fix everything. But if you're invested in an organization, you're, in my opinion, invested in the leadership of that organization as well. And so if you are a part of that, then it's a part of your purview to help in that kind of situation. But I think the complexity for every single instance of this is important to note, and so it might not work across the board. In this particular instance, though, we chose to just say that we're going to fund them no matter what. So pose the question about what kind of funding rather than yes or no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a key distinction. So another person brings equity to the conversation in their question, asking how capacity building and capitalization intersect with community building, and they use they say cultural equity. I'm wondering where and how you see arts organizations and grant makers working together to tackle gentrification and cultural erasure.
So I'll look at the first part of the question of just like organizations thinking about equity and inclusion, and when it comes to capitalization and capacity building. I think now that the data is out there that we have to do a lot more to be inclusive organizations than have a 3-hour retreat. I think there have been extensive studies that have proven that in order for real equity and inclusion to happen in organizations, the whole structure of the organization has to change. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of capital in order to do this work. And as a funder who gets proposals in capacity building, I've been getting a lot of proposals lately from organizations that are really thinking creatively of like what they can do, how they can structure their organization to really help them to be more inclusive, which includes either bringing in a consultant who's doing a full evaluation, which is really just part of the equation, but then taking it a step further, and after that, really I'm trying to figure out and understand like what are particular staff positions that you need in order to be able to implement these goals, whether it's whether it's an HR person who has these things in mind, or whether it's a particular person that's solely devoted to ensuring that your organization is inclusive in all of its operations. And so the capital piece is very important in that this work takes lots of resources and lots of money. And so that's that's why I feel that it's really important to be able to build capacity in organizations in order to be able to like fully invest in these particular causes. I think the other question was regarding using these organizations to really fight gentrification. And this is a really a difficult question because I know we all know that we're going through gentrification in pretty much a lot of our communities that we're in, regardless of where we are in the country. And it's unfortunate, but like artists sometimes get a bad rep that they cause gentrification, which I think is really an unfortunate narrative of our community. I think artists have the potential to build the economy of a community and build that economy for the people who are currently living in that community. And there are definitely a lot of approaches that are out there, especially when you kind of think about creative placemaking and kind of organizations kind of taking a holistic approach to economic development within communities while using the arts. In the gentrification question, like I think artists and arts organizations have definitely a role to play within building the economy of poor communities, but at the same time ensuring that while the economy is growing, ensuring that the participants, the community members that are currently there, are able to participate in that. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I'll ask one more question before we wrap up here. So, there was a big emphasis overall in collaboration and bringing all groups together in one room. And so how do funders realistically start these types of dialogues? Usually it'll begin with an informal call, but should it be something that's formal? How is this happening in our own communities?
I think that that's probably a question for the webinar group. I'm sure every community operates in its own way, but I do think, at least from my point of view here in New York, that there are a variety of starting points. It might be a casual phone call or a coffee, or it might be a very intentional effort to do something big and bold. And I've seen both of those kinds of things work. I think the earlier question about the limitations of funder collaboratives was interesting because we're doing this presentation as if a funder collaborative will solve all problems, and I think we know that it won't. But the idea is the combined resources of many funders are better than working in isolation. So a funder collaborative could be something official where there are actual dollars being dedicated to a particular purpose, but it could also just be, I think, the idea of having these networks in place so these conversations can happen. Having funders to call upon in your community when you're reaching a decision, or if you have a challenge of your own that you need to share and get feedback on. So the idea of these collaboratives taking one particular form or one particular shape, I think is not the way to go. I think it's really dependent on every situation that you're encountering. It might be something different each time.
Yeah, and I think the key part is just talking to each other, and regardless of what structure that takes place. To be honest, as we were preparing for this webinar, I just happened to sit in on, I guess, the final minutes of Anna's staff meeting, and they happened to bring up organizations and information about organizations that I fund through my work as well that I had no clue about. And so it's interesting how kind of like just me tagging along on this like 5-minute tail end of a staff meeting allowed me to learn so much more about my grantees that I didn't know before. So you can get started by just calling up that another grantee and asking them to sit down for coffee or tea, and just having conversations about each other's work, and make sure you just continue to do that. Make sure it's not just a one-off. That's what I would recommend. Just start networking with your peers.
Awesome. Thank you both for all of those great answers. And I will hand it back to you to give us the conclusion.
Well, thanks, Sherilyn. I think we're out of time. You can see the bullet points here about these thoughts, but hopefully the takeaway is really that collaboration is not always the easiest route, but can perhaps be a more productive route. And our enthusiasm about it is really born out of real-life experience. And so we hope that in ongoing conversations with all of you at the next GIA conference and any time in between, that we can keep having these opportunities to talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how we can work together.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to give another huge thank you to Anna and Roman for presenting today. There was a lot of incredible information, and the presentation today has been recorded, so we'll be sending you a link to the file and the presentation slides in the next day or two. We invite you to take a brief survey that we'll share immediately following the webinar, and your feedback is always important to us and helps us in the design of future webinars. If you have further questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, Sherilyn Seeley, and we thank you again for joining us. Have a great day.